Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines. We're very fortunate to have on the show our United States Congressman, Bill Cassidy. Bill is a congressman for District 6 and represents about 740,000 Louisianians. He's going to talk to us about the President's recent State of the Union address and the big issues that face our country. Those issues include our energy policy, the huge national debt, and health care policy. So join us on the next Legal Lines with United States Congressman Bill Cassidy.
Want to learn the secret to big savings on TV, internet, and phone? It's bundling your services with Cox. When you bundle with Cox, you get digital cable, high-speed internet with Power Boost, and telephone, all for one low monthly price. That's 3 fantastic services at one low price that will make you smile. The secret is out. The more you bundle, the more you save. So get a whole lot and save a whole lot when you bundle with Cox.
Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm again very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman for District 6, Bill Cassidy. Bill, again, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, Locke, I love it. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you here. 2 days ago, you were sitting in Washington, D.C. in the Congress for the President's State of the Union. Tell us about it.
Well, I was sitting next to Nikki Tsongas. It was overflow. She's a congresswoman from Massachusetts. And of course, it is a privilege to serve in Congress, and one of the privileges is to participate in those things that our founding fathers set up. Now, Thomas Jefferson didn't give a State of the Union speech, but he sent a message. Now the President gave that message. It's good.
You've been there for some pretty extraordinary events when he was first inaugurated, and of course the first African-American to ever be elected president, easily million plus folks, and now sat through a couple of these. Yeah. So what were your thoughts?
The President started off speaking about the values that unite us. And the President started off by speaking about how we as Americans are based upon an idea. Now we kind of like that, and our ideas of liberty and freedom. And there's great common ground there. The next part of his speech was his vision of how we go forward to the future. And it is a vision that he's very clear about. It is a vision which has bigger government and government picking winners and losers in the marketplace, and that is a vision. Now, my own impression, though, is that we have an alternative vision. It's an alternative vision where government doesn't lead, but the people lead.
Right.
And the next 2 years will be a debate that your viewers and others will participate in. Do we want the government leading or do we want the people leading? And it's going to be an important debate.
And Bill, typically, and we've talked about this, that's kind of the distinction that's made between the philosophies of governing. The Democratic folks, for the most part, tend to believe that the government is the entity that should kind of guide where resources are focused, whereas the Republican philosophy is leave the money and the resources with the people because they are going to decide the most efficient and best use of those resources.
Now, a great example is energy. You and I were speaking before we came on camera. The President's speech, as he was speaking about how if there's an innovator of clean energy, we need to ensure that he has a market for that invention. That what that really means is that they're going to put a tax on oil and gas because oil and gas is so inexpensive and so useful that people are going to naturally use that. The President's vision is that the government taxes this and uses that money to subsidize, he says invest, but it's the same thing.
Spending money.
Spending money, government
our tax money.
Our tax dollars upon somebody whose idea would not otherwise be successful. But if you give them a subsidy, they will be.
Well, and it's interesting, Bill, because his energy secretary has made it clear, I think he's quoted as saying the week before he was nominated that we needed to get America's gas up as high as Europe's gas, which was about $5 a gallon. And I believe President Obama has made it clear that for certain of his visions to take place, goals to be achieved, the cost of energy has to quote, necessarily skyrocket.
Yes, and of course their party feels like global warming is a big issue and that man release of carbon is causing it. So the rationale that they would advance is that they need to make fossil fuel more expensive. Now we in Louisiana know that 1 out of 7 Louisianians are employed in an industry something about energy.
Bill, I read 9.2 million jobs are provided by the energy sector.
Oh, I'm sure. And think about it. The natural gas that we produce in Louisiana literally fuels manufacturing across the United States. And so if you are manufacturing Caterpillar tractors, you're either using coal or natural gas. Now, if you put a tax on natural gas and coal, then you're putting a tax on those manufacturing jobs in Illinois, and those manufacturing jobs will move elsewhere.
And I read that for every 4 green energy jobs, you're losing 9 other jobs. And we're talking about a time when unemployment is 9.4, 9.5% of the population, and that's really not accurate because it's more like 17% or 18% if you count folks who've just given up or taken part-time.
You kind of get a glimpse of it, of what that kind of future is, and it is a future that the president favors. When you look at home at Thibodeau with oil at $90 a barrel should be exploding.
Right.
There should be people moving in from all over, and there should be increasing competition for good workers, so their wages would automatically be going up, and people who are good workers with skills, even those who are unskilled, would make more and more money. Instead, employment's flat because of the Outer Continental Shelf drilling being shut down by the moratorium and the permitatorium. That is the future if the president's vision holds.
Well, and let's explain the difference, because there was a moratorium after the tragic spill. It was lifted in October of last year, but as I understand it, only 2 permits have been issued since then.
Yes.
To allow drilling in that area.
And very importantly, there is a process called the permit to explore. Okay, so a company comes to the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. and says, we would like to be able to explore. If they explore and find a deposit of oil and gas beneath the surface, then they start filing applications to drill. So far, there's been no applications to explore approved since the moratorium, or if they have, it's just been in the last few weeks. So not only are they not allowing drilling that was already in the lineup to take place,
wow.
They've shut off the application to explore, which means that in the longer run, there's
nothing in the pipeline.
Nothing in the pipeline.
Nothing
literally,
in the pipeline.
Literally, in terms of there's not going to be anything in the pipeline coming on shore.
That's right.
And there's nothing in the pipeline to put something in the pipeline.
Which makes us more dependent on foreign oil, which is a national security interest. But before we go there, as I understand it, the rigs that we have that are $500,000 a day to operate, they're not going to sit around twiddling their thumbs waiting for the okay. They're boogieing on out of here to Brazil and Africa and wherever.
And what you and I and the viewers know, Locke, is it's not the rig that concerns us as much as the hundreds of workers that work on the rig. And not just the workers that work on the rig, but that work on the supply boats that take grocery out there, our helicopters, our doctors and nurses that provide medical services.
Right.
I'm told that the impact among grocery stores has been tremendous because the rig workers eat so well and they buy the groceries from local grocery markets. It just ripples out through the economy.
Well, let's talk about the national security aspect of this. As pointed out, if we're not generating our own energy supplies domestically, we have to go out of country, which is primarily the Middle East, with a lot of folks who don't like us.
Yes, and if you think of it, energy is really of 2 types. It is electrical that comes through the grid and turns on the lights, and it is transportation. And so what we put in our cars is typically a different sort of energy than what we burn, so to speak, to get our lights on. Now, the president's vision is that we make transportation fuel more expensive by however we do that, but also that we make electrical generation fuel more expensive. Coal is cheap. 50% of our power in this country is from coal. You can produce a kilowatt hour for like 4 cents using coal.
And it's becoming very clean.
And the president, in fairness, wants to have cleaner coal. That said, he really, if you listen to him, wants to transition away from traditional coal, which the states that have done so have electrical costs which are 2 to 3 times higher than that of, say, Kentucky. So we're really talking about raising electricity costs 2 to 3 times to fulfill his vision.
Well, let's keep talking about this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, and our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back.
Everybody loves on demand from Cox. Well, did you know the love's about to grow? Soon, your on-demand menu will have a whole new look, making it easier than ever to find your favorite shows, access hundreds of movies, and thousands of free programming choices, even HD, just like that, so you can watch what you want to watch when you want to watch it. It just keeps growing better every day. See what's coming on demand and get more out of what you're into with Cox Digital Cable.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. Again, I'm very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman for District 6, Bill Cassidy. Again, Bill, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Locke.
You represent, I think you said, 740,000 Louisianians.
Thereabouts. You know, our district has grown since Hurricane Katrina. So now the district that I'm privileged to represent is the largest in the state.
And we have the seat of government in your district.
We have the seat of government. We have 3 institutions of higher education. We have a lot of petrochemical. We have a very diverse district. It's a great district to represent.
We were talking about energy, and we started to discuss it in the context of a national security concern. What percentage, if you know, do we import that we are not producing for our energy needs domestically?
For oil, I want to say it's 20%. No, wait a second. When we say import, it's very clear, it's very important to be clear. There's a certain amount that we import from Mexico and Canada.
And Canada, right.
Now, yes, that's importation, but if we send $100 million in money for oil to Mexico, most likely Mexico is going to use that to buy $100 million worth of our goods.
We're helping our neighbors.
We're helping our neighbors who then purchase from us.
Who like us.
Yeah. Whereas now distinguish that importation from that which we bring from Venezuela or from some of the Middle Eastern countries which hate us.
Right.
Now that is the one I think is about 20%.
Okay.
But that's the one that provides the margin. If our consumption goes up, it comes from Venezuela and the Middle East. If our consumption goes down, most likely we're not buying from them, but we're still buying from Canada and from Mexico.
And if they decide to raise their prices on us, or there's turmoil over there like there very well could be in the future, we got some serious problems here.
And that's the marginal price that drives, that's the tail wagging the dog. Because if we know the last 20% we have to buy is from Venezuela, and they decide to increase their prices by $10 a barrel, or the OPEC does, well, then everything else rises to meet that mark.
So it's in our best interest as a country to somehow come up with a scenario where we don't have to buy as much, or if lucky enough, fortunate enough, any of that oil from them. How can we do that? Are there other alternative energy sources, solar, wind, et cetera, that's practical? Is there another side to this coin?
Well, there's, if you will, 3 broad things we could do, maybe 4. The first would be invest in mass transit, but that's really going to be a long-term solution. When the president talks about high-speed rail, he means between Milwaukee and Los Angeles.
That's not helping the country.
Yeah, not between Broadmoor Subdivision and Denham Springs. Secondly, we could go to electric cars. Now, in that case, you're using wind and solar, putting the electricity on the grid and powering a car. But the problem with electric cars is they're electric cars. So if you're driving down the road and you're going to the beach and you run out of electricity, you got to plug it in overnight in order to charge to get to Pensacola. Now, it's not the same as
not practical.
Not practical except for around town type things. The third is to increase our domestic production of oil. One of the things that frustrates us in Louisiana, we know that outer continental shelf drilling now supplies about 20% of the oil that the United States produces domestically. Now think about it.
That's a chunk.
That's a chunk. 20% is coming from off the coast of Louisiana and Texas. And the president has put the permitatorium, is not allowing more drilling to take place. So the ticket to increased energy security in terms of transportation fuel is off the coast of Louisiana, but it's not allowed to be developed, even though it would create jobs and increase our energy security. The fourth option, if some way we can transition from oil to, say, natural gas as a transportation fuel. We got so much natural gas, man. We got 150 years worth of natural gas. So T. Boone Pickens is pushing his plan.
But I heard recently he's said enough. I'm out of here. Not going to do it anymore.
Well, he may, but there are, one of the things I hope to work on, others are working on, is how do you make it more practical for natural gas to be used as a transportation fuel?
And as I'm thinking about it, it was really more the wind power.
Yeah. His Team Boone Pickens plan was about this much wind and about that much natural gas.
But that's practical, because the bottom line is 83% of our energy needs are provided by, as I understand it, fossil fuels, and the rest are these other sources.
And now there's some countries, for example, Iran, Argentina, and some states such as I think Utah or Idaho that have in the case of Iran, most of their automobiles are powered by compressed natural gas. Argentina, a lot of their automobiles are done by compressed natural gas.
So we can do it.
We can do it. You got to have a distribution system, and that's what's holding us up.
And so that would be an infrastructure worth investing in.
It would be. Now, as it turns out, though, Locke, remember how we went back, man, and we started our conversation? Is it the government leading the way or the genius of the American people?
Right.
So what if you went to the oil companies and said, okay, oil companies, we want you to invest in the infrastructure to bring compressed natural gas to
And
trucks.
we'll give you a tax credit for
And we'll give you a tax credit. Or we can have the government saying that we are going to subsidize a company to do it. Well, in the one case, the petrochemical companies, the oil and gas companies have an incentive to build the market. They're going to put those pumps exactly where they know the most consumption will take place.
They already have the infrastructure, frankly. They've got all the locations, the distributors, and everything.
And they're used to building pipelines. The government, I'm afraid, under political pressure, would put pumps out in the middle of nowhere because some well-connected politician says, I need a pump in my hometown.
Interesting. Well, that kind of brings me to the whole government, because, up until a couple of months ago, the Republicans were pretty much, the stepchild in the back room in the closet, with the door locked. Y'all weren't permitted a whole lot of involvement, but that changed with the election. And so the Republican Party ideas now can carry great weight. Y'all have a little bit of a hammer and a stick. Explain to the folks.
Clearly, there's three, as we all know. There's the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. And for a law to pass, it has to go through the House, the Senate, and be signed into law by the president. So the president is still a Democrat, and the Senate is still controlled by Democrats, but the House is controlled by Republicans. So in no way can the House of Representatives exert its will upon the American people. But the President and Harry Reid in the Senate, neither can they exert their will unless Republicans agree. So I think we're going to have a agenda that's less far left over the next 2 years, and more reflective of where the American people are, which is typically center-right.
And of course, the House has the power of the purse strings, the money.
Yes.
And so if there are programs that have been implemented or attempted to be implemented that require funding, the House can say, ain't happening, we're shutting it down.
And for example, the Environmental Protection Agency issues lots of regulations which have an incredible impact upon industry. Now, when you hear of impact upon industry, think impact upon jobs. If local petrochemical plants have to spend $50 million to comply, that's potentially $50 million they won't use for employing people after the initial construction, particularly if they're paying fines. Okay. So one thing we can do in Congress is review regulations. We're going to propose an act, I think this next week or next time we're in session, which would say if a regulation is being passed which has over $100 million of impact upon businesses or individuals, that it has to be reviewed by Congress. So if EPA puts an edict out there which raises everybody's electricity rates, and altogether it's over $100 million, Congress has to review it. That's why we're there, to review. Excellent. So that'll be a good law.
So there's now a check on the exercise of that power.
We hope so.
All right, let's talk about that on the last segment. This is Locke Meredith and Legal Lines and our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back.
Did you know that high-def programming from Cox is free? That's right. Cox gives you a ton of HD channels for no additional cost. Your favorite HD channels, your local channels in HD, and even more HD choices with On Demand, and more being added every day. So get a whole lot more HD for a whole lot less with Cox Digital Cable.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. Again, I'm Locke Meredith, and very pleased to have on the show our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Bill, we were talking about the shift in power. The House is now controlled by Republicans, and as a result, You've been appointed to some pretty powerful committees. Explain to the folks.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. There's a committee called Energy and Commerce, which I'm now appointed to.
Pretty relevant for the state of Louisiana.
For the state of Louisiana, because it's not only energy and commerce, but healthcare is underneath commerce. And so there's subcommittees. Most of your viewers may know that I work at Earl K. Long Hospital with LSU Med School. I'm a physician and I still teach out there. So on the health subcommittee, we'll be responsible for coming up with an alternative to the healthcare plan that was passed last Congress, one which I think is more patient-centered as opposed to being government-centered.
Excellent. And you're on the front lines.
On the front lines. But on the front lines of seeing patients and speaking to patients as to what they expect,
right,
as opposed to what they want kind of forced on them. Secondly, I'm on a committee called the Environment and the Economy. So clearly, we know we want to have a clean environment. We want to be able to breathe clean air and have clean water. We also know that sometimes regulations take it a little bit further than you can reasonably achieve at the expense of a great number of jobs. So we want to have that balance. We all want the clean environment, and we also want to preserve our jobs.
Let's talk about the economy, because debt, we've talked about this before, is just out of control. They're pushing to get the debt ceiling raised from 1.3 to 1.5, which is the greatest debt level we've ever had in the history of this nation. If you add them all up, we're close to $14.5 trillion in debt. That's almost $50,000 for every man, woman, and child. Explain to the folks kind of your views on this.
The last Congress, and I'm pleased to say I voted against almost every one of these spending bills, but the last Congress passed so much spending that we have taken our debt to levels, as you described, higher than they've ever been before. Now, we have this debt rolling through, and the question is, what do we do in the future?
Right.
Now, the problem is, you can say, okay, we're not going to pay it, but that means that the good things aren't paid as well as the bad things. So the senior citizen waiting for their Social Security check would not get their Social Security check if we totally decide not to pay our debt. You can't do that.
Sure.
Someone likened it to your teenage son takes his credit card you've given him, spends $30,000 in 2 weeks. Well, you're not going to stiff the companies that he purchased it from. You're going to cut up the credit card, decrease his allowance, and then use that to pay it down, but it's going to take a while to pay it down.
You know what, though? I don't think I'd give my kids a credit card that had an unlimited debt ceiling on it.
Yes.
I think I'd give them a credit card that had a limit, maybe like an amendment to the United States Constitution that requires a balanced budget or something.
I co-sponsored legislation to ask for such an amendment. I don't think the president would allow it to go forward because we do have a check and balance still. But that said, what we are going to do, if a debt ceiling is raised, it's going to be only if the president and the Democratic Senate agrees to significant cuts. Okay? If you want that debt ceiling raised, we want you to go back to 2008 levels in terms of the budget. We want you to decrease the funding you've put over here and decrease the funding you've put over there, which is driving up the deficit. If we can do that, then something good can come out of this, frankly, very worrisome situation.
Because, Bill, as I understand it, he proposed a freeze last year of 3% of the non-mandatory domestic budget. That wasn't implemented. Now he's proposed a 5-year freeze. Same criteria. The major drivers of our debt is Social Security, the military, and there's one other one.
Medicare and Medicaid.
Medicare and Medicaid.
But, think about it.
So what do we do?
First, let me compliment, just as an aside, let me compliment the American people. Because I was elected 2 years ago concerned about government spending. And I went to Washington and no one was concerned. We were on the Republican side, but we were such a small minority, there was no way we could get anything done. If every single Republican voted against a bill like we did against the health care bill, which is $2.6 trillion of new spending over 10 years.
Which their own guy came out and admitted, yesterday, that it's not going to hold down costs and you're not going to be able to keep the insurance.
And so with $2.6 trillion in new spending, that was still passed despite every Republican opposing. The American people went crazy.
They sure did.
And the American people last November demanded something different. So all of a sudden, the other side, the Democratic side, which some of your viewers are Democrats and Republicans, I represent everybody.
That's right.
I'm only using the shorthand of Washington. Here, we're basically not far apart. There are some differences. So in Washington, the president and his allies are now talking about controlling the deficit And it's not because of Republicans, I wish I could say that. It's because of the American people, which is even a better thing to say. Americans have said, make the deficit a priority. And the president is. And so, or at least says he is. So let's give credit to the American people, Locke. Man, the system is working.
So what are we going to do though, Bill? I mean, the talk is cheap. I've heard a lot of talk, and I'm not hearing